The morning my daughter-in-law called to tell me what they had planned for my birthday, I was standing in my backyard pulling dead heads off the rose bushes. It was early April, cool enough that I still needed a jacket, and the yard smelled like wet soil and something green trying to come back. I had my phone tucked between my ear and my shoulder, the way you do when your hands are full of something you don't want to put down. "We've already made the reservation," she said. "Saturday the 19th, Harborview Grill. 8 people, 7:30. I said, "That's my birthday." "That's the point," she said. "We're celebrating you." I didn't say anything else. I just stood there with a fistful of dead roses and waited for the rest of it. "Oh, and we figured since it's your birthday dinner, you'd want to treat everyone. You know how you always do." I set the roses down on the patio table. I didn't answer right away. I counted 4 seconds in my head before I said, "Let me think about that." She laughed like I'd said something funny and moved on to talking about the menu. I turned 63 that spring. My husband, Frank, had been gone for 4 years by then. We were married 31 years, and in 31 years, I don't think I ever once had a birthday dinner that someone else paid for. That wasn't a complaint, not really. Frank believed in gestures. He believed in making a production out of the small things. Every year, no matter what, there was a card on the kitchen counter when I woke up. There was usually something wrapped in the kind of tissue paper that takes 10 minutes to get through. And dinner was always somewhere he'd made a reservation for weeks in advance, just the two of us, somewhere quiet with good wine and real cloth napkins. He never once suggested I cover the bill. After he was gone, the birthdays changed. The first year, my son and his wife took me to a chain restaurant near their house because the baby had been fussy and they didn't want to go far. My daughter sent flowers, which was kind. But she was in Phoenix by then, and flights were expensive, and she had her own things going on. I understood. I always understood. That was what I did best, probably. The second year, my son suggested we do something bigger. Invite the whole family. Make it an event. I thought that sounded nice, genuinely. I pictured a long table somewhere, and everyone laughing, and maybe one of the grandkids trying to blow out my candles before I could get to them. What I did not picture was the check arriving, and everyone suddenly very interested in their phones. I paid that year, and the year after, and in the spring of my 63rd birthday, when my daughter-in-law called to tell me they'd already booked Harborview Grill for 8 people at 7:30. I knew, without asking, that I would be expected to pay for that too. Harborview Grill was not a modest place. I knew it because Frank and I had been there twice, once for our 25th anniversary, and once when his firm had a client dinner and he brought me along. The kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices because the assumption is that if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't be there. I had looked it up once out of curiosity the year before. Entrees ran between $60 and $90. With drinks and appetizers and dessert for 8 people, you were looking at $1,000 before the tip. My son called that evening. He sounded pleased with himself the way he always did when he thought he'd arranged something. "Claudia set it all up," he said. "She's been planning it for a couple weeks." "I know," I said. "She called me this afternoon." "It's going to be great, Mom. The whole family together." "You deserve something special." I asked him who was coming. He listed them off, himself and Claudia. Their 2 kids, though the older one was in college and might not make it. His sister from Phoenix, who was flying in with her boyfriend, the one I had met once at Thanksgiving, and whose name I could never quite hold on to. Frank's brother and his wife. And 2 of Claudia's sisters, who I liked, but who I also knew had never once paid for anything at a family gathering in their lives. 8 people, $60 to $90 an entree, plus wine, which my son drank more of than he'd admit. "Sounds like a full table," I said. "It's your birthday," he said, like that explained everything. What nobody in my family knew, what I had never found a reason to mention, was that I had been sitting on something for almost a year. Frank had left me the house, of course, and his retirement accounts, and we'd always been comfortable. But the previous April, 14 months before my birthday dinner was being planned, Without my input, I had sold a small piece of commercial property that Frank and I had bought together in 1994. A strip of land near the edge of town that had sat undeveloped for years while we paid the taxes on it and forgot about it and then remembered it again every time we did our returns. The developer who bought it paid $840,000. I had not told my children. Not because I was hiding it exactly, but because I had learned something in the years since Frank died. The moment people know you have money is the moment they start spending it for you. I had watched it happen to my friend Beverly after her husband's life insurance came in. Her kids had opinions about her house, her car, her vacations, her financial advisor. They meant well, most of them, but meaning well and respecting someone's autonomy are not the same thing. So I kept it quiet. I put most of it in accounts my children didn't know about. I kept my same house, kept driving the same 7-year-old Volvo, kept clipping coupons at the grocery store in a way that would have made Frank laugh. I was not performing poverty. I was just protecting something that was mine. The week after Claudia's phone call, I did 2 things. The first was that I called my travel agent. Yes, I still have one. A woman named Patty who has been booking my trips since before online reservations existed, and I trust her more than any website. And I asked her to look into something I had been considering for a while. A river cruise, the Danube. 2 weeks, departing from Vienna, through Bratislava and Budapest, and into the Delta. I had looked at the brochure probably 6 times since the previous fall, leaving it on my nightstand and thinking, maybe next year. Frank had always wanted to do a river cruise. I had always said we'd get around to it. The second thing I did was call my son. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did when he wasn't busy with something he considered more important. "The dinner," I said. "I need to talk to you about it. Everything okay? I want to be clear about something. I'm happy to come to dinner and celebrate with the family, but I'm not going to pay for everyone this year." There was a pause. The kind that meant he was recalibrating. "Mom, it's your birthday." "I know it is, which is actually the reason I think someone else might want to cover the bill." He laughed a little, not a warm laugh. More like the kind you use when you're hoping something will go away. "It's not a big deal," he said. "You always." "I know I always have," I said. "That's what I'm telling you. I'm not going to this time." He said he'd talk to Claudia. He said it in the way that meant he hoped Claudia would talk me out of it. I said that was fine, and we hung up. Claudia called the next morning. She was pleasant about it, which in some ways was worse than if she'd been sharp. She said she understood completely. Of course, no pressure at all. She just wanted to make sure I knew that the reservation was already made, and everyone was looking forward to it, and it might be a little awkward to renegotiate the financial arrangement this late. I told her I appreciated her letting me know. She said, "So we'll see you Saturday the 19th? I said, "I'll be in touch." She took that as a yes. Patty called me 2 days later. There was a spot on the April 18th departure Vienna to the Black Sea. I would fly into Vienna on the 17th, spend a night at a hotel by the Ringstrasse, and board the ship the following morning. 17 days total, door to door. I said yes before she finished reading me the details. I booked the flight. I booked the hotel. I dug out my passport, which had one entry in it from a trip Frank and I took to London in 2015, and I set it on the kitchen counter where I could look at it. I did not call my son. I did not call my daughter. I did call my friend Rosemary, who had been my closest friend since we taught together at the same middle school for 11 years, and who has the specific quality I have always admired in a friend, which is that she responds to unexpected news with simple delight rather than a list of concerns. "You're going to the Danube," she said. "April 17th. By yourself. By myself." "Good for you," she said, and she meant it without any qualifications. I spent the following week doing what I needed to do. I arranged for my neighbor's son to check on the house. I bought a new duffel bag because my old suitcase had a broken wheel that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I went to the library and found 2 books about Central European history because I like to know something about a place before I arrive in it. I also wrote 4 letters. 1 to my son, 1 to my daughter, 1 to Frank's brother, who I had always liked and who I thought deserved a direct word from me, and one that I sealed and left on the kitchen table with a note on the envelope that said, "Open when you're ready to talk without being angry." That last one was for my son. I wasn't sure he'd ever open it, but I wrote it anyway. My daughter called on the 15th. She had talked to her brother, she said, and everyone was confused about what was happening. "Are you still coming to dinner Saturday?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm flying to Vienna on Friday." Silence. "Mom." "I've been thinking about this trip for a long time," I said. "Your father and I always wanted to do a river cruise. I decided this was the year. You booked an international trip over your own birthday dinner." I booked a trip I wanted to take. The birthday dinner was not something I planned or wanted. It was something that was arranged for me without my input and with the expectation that I would pay for 10 people I didn't invite. 8 people! More silence. "I just think," she said, and then she stopped. She tried again. "I think you're making a statement." "I'm taking a trip," I said. "If it also makes a statement, I can live with that." She called back an hour later and said she thought what I was doing was passive-aggressive. I told her I disagreed, but that I loved her and that I hoped she had a good flight back to Phoenix. On Friday morning, I woke up at 4:15 without an alarm. I made coffee and stood in the kitchen in the dark, the way I have done my whole adult life when there's something big coming. The house was quiet. The street outside was quiet. I had packed the night before, just the one duffel, nothing excessive. I had my passport, my reading glasses, the 2 library books, and a photograph of Frank and me that I'd taken from the mantel and wrapped in a clean t-shirt so the glass wouldn't break. The taxi came at 5. My driver was a young man who didn't try to make conversation, which I was grateful for. I watched the town go by in the dark, the familiar streets, the hardware store Frank used to go to every Saturday morning, the park where my kids had soccer games for what felt like a decade straight, the turnoff toward the elementary school where I taught for 22 years before I retired. I was not sad. That surprised me a little. I had thought there might be some sadness, some second-guessing. There wasn't. What I felt was something quieter and harder to name, like the way a room feels when you've finally moved the furniture to where it should have always been. I got to the gate with time to spare. I bought a bottle of water and a magazine I didn't read. I sat and watched the gate area fill up with people who were all going somewhere, all carrying their particular reasons with them. When we boarded, I found my seat by the window and settled in. The woman next to me was reading a novel with a red cover, and we smiled at each other the way strangers do when they've silently agreed to be pleasant but not chatty. I put my headphones in. I watched the tarmac crew through the small oval window, moving in the orange runway lights with their practiced efficiency. The plane pushed back. The terminal began to slide away. My phone was already in airplane mode. I had put it there before I got in the taxi. I had seen, before I did, 3 missed calls from my son and 1 from Claudia, all from the previous evening. I had read the texts. My son said, "Mom, please call me. We need to talk about this." Claudia said, "The reservation is non-refundable." My daughter said, "I hope you know what you're doing." I did know what I was doing. I was going to Vienna. The wheels left the ground. I have thought about that moment many times since. The particular sensation of lifting. The way the ground just releases you if you let it. My son had sent one more text at 11 the night before. It said, "Fine, enjoy your trip." There was no period. I noticed the absence of the period and thought, that's exactly right. Some things don't have endings yet. Vienna was gray and cold when I landed. The kind of cold that isn't brutal, but insists on itself. I took the train from the airport into the city the way Patty had instructed me. And I walked from the station to the hotel, pulling my duffel behind me over the cobblestones, looking up at the buildings the way you do in a European city, when everything is older than anything back home. The hotel was small, 5 floors, on a side street off the Ringstrasse. The woman at the front desk handed me a room key and a small envelope of tourist maps, and told me in English that was better than mine, that breakfast was served until 10, and that the opera house was 6 minutes on foot. My room was on the third floor, with a window that looked onto a courtyard where someone had put out a single iron chair and a potted tree that was just starting to bud. I set my bag down and stood at the window for a moment. I was 63 years old. I was in Vienna. My son was angry with me. My daughter thought I was making a statement. The non-refundable reservation at Harborview Grill was probably going to happen without me. And whoever ended up with my seat was going to have a fine time and nobody would cover the check, and the evening would either be a disaster or it wouldn't be. And either way, the earth would continue turning. I went downstairs and walked to the Ringstrasse and followed it along the way Patty had suggested, past the Parliament and the Kunsthistorisches Museum, and eventually to a cafe where I ordered coffee and a piece of cake I didn't know the name of and sat by the window watching people walk by. I had brought Frank's photograph in my bag. I did not take it out in the cafe. I didn't need to. He had been with me the whole morning, the way he always was when I was doing something he would have approved of. He would have approved. I took the river cruise for 17 days. I will not recount every moment of it because that is not what this is about, and because some things are better held quietly than described. But I will say this. The Danube at dawn from the deck of a ship is something I was not prepared for, the way it moves. The colors of the riverbank in the early light, the small villages that appear and disappear before you've had time to properly look at them. I stood on that deck every morning with my coffee and my jacket, and I thought Frank would have loved this. Frank would have been unbearable about the history. Frank would have talked to everyone at dinner and known all their names by the second night. I thought about him without the usual weight. That was something. On the fourth day, in Budapest, I bought a postcard of the Chain Bridge and wrote on the back of it, "Having a good birthday. Wish you were here. L." I put it in my bag. I didn't mail it anywhere. It was just something I needed to write. My son called when I was in Bratislava. I was in a small square eating a pastry I'd bought from a cart, and I saw his name on the screen and I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice in the voicemail was quieter than I expected, less certain. He said he hoped I was safe. He said Claudia was sorry about how the conversation had gone. He said they were starting to understand why I was upset. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I put my phone away and finished my pastry. I called him back 3 days later, from the ship, when the signal was clear and I had thought through what I wanted to say. "I'm not upset," I told him. "I want you to understand that. I'm not doing this because I'm angry at you. I did it because it was mine to do. Your father's been gone 4 years and I've been waiting for my own life to start again. I was waiting for someone to give me permission without knowing that's what I was doing. This trip was me figuring out that I don't need anyone's permission." He didn't say anything for a moment. "That's a lot," he said finally. "I know. You could have talked to us." "I tried to talk to you. You told me to talk to Claudia." Another silence. "That's fair," he said. And then, "Are you having a good time?" "I'm having a wonderful time." He laughed quietly, without the edge in it this time. "Good," he said. "That's good, Mom." We talked for another 20 minutes. It was not a resolution. Not the kind you get in movies where everything clarifies in a single conversation and everyone learns their lesson. It was more like the beginning of something. A first thaw. The kind of thing that takes more than one phone call to work through, but at least you've started. I came home on a Thursday afternoon, tired in the good way that travel leaves you. My neighbor had left a vase of tulips from her garden on the porch, which made me stop and just look at it for a moment. Before I got my key out. The house smelled like itself, the way a house does when you've been away long enough to notice it. I put my bag down in the hallway. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the 4 letters I'd written, still lined up on the counter the way I'd left them. 3 of them had been opened. The one I'd left for Frank's brother, the one for my daughter, and the general one I'd written to the family. Only one remained sealed. The letter to my son with the note that said "Open, when you're ready to talk without being angry." It was still there. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. His name in my handwriting on the front. I put it back on the counter. It would wait. He would get there when he got there, and when he did, I would be right here. I put the kettle on. I took Frank's photograph out of my bag and set it back on the mantel where it belonged. I looked at him in the frame. That picture from our trip to Vancouver, the one where he's squinting into the sun and laughing at something I just said. And I thought, I went. I finally went. The kettle started to hiss. The tulips on the porch were pink and orange and were leaning toward the afternoon light the way flowers do. I had missed nothing. I had only found things I didn't know I was still looking for.